Remember Bill Bellamy. What just happened to him will leave you stunned. Do you remember Bill Bellamy, the MTV king who once had every living room in America tuned in laughing and repeating his booty call joke like gospel? Here's the shocking part: at the very peak of his fame, he didn't fall. He vanished. No scandal, no goodbye. Just silence so loud it made the industry nervous. And when he finally came back, what he revealed about MTV Hollywood and a near-death fight for his life hit fans like a punch to the chest. Stay with me because this story gets deeper and wilder from here. If you're ready for the truth behind the legend, hit like, subscribe, and let's dive in. The mystery of Bill Bellamy's disappearance. Remember Bill Bellamy, the sharp-witted, velvet-voiced entertainer whose presence once defined MTV's electric pulse? For millions of Americans in the 90s, he wasn't just a host. He was the face that made music television feel alive. With a smile that disarmed even the toughest rappers and a rhythm that matched the beats he introduced, Bellamy became a cultural connector at a time when MTV shaped the nation's imagination. He was the first person ever to say booty call on television, a moment so unexpected and so perfectly delivered that it instantly embedded itself into pop culture vocabulary. Back then, his rise felt unstoppable. Industry watchers whispered that he could be the next Chris Tucker, or even a younger, smoother Jamie Foxx ready to leap from TV personality to full-blown Hollywood supernova. His momentum seemed guaranteed, his future limitless, until suddenly it wasn't. Bill Bellamy's disappearance wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, too quiet. One day he was on screens across America, the charismatic king of MTV Jams and Beach House, and the next, he simply wasn't there. No scandal, no dramatic farewell, no headlines screaming what went wrong. For years, fans asked the same question: where did Bill go? The curiosity grew deeper because Bellamy, unlike many stars of his era, had no public downfall. He didn't flame out. He didn't get caught in controversy. He just slipped out of the frame, leaving behind a void in the fabric of 90s entertainment that no one quite filled. Even in reruns, his absence felt strange, like watching a party after the life of the party had left. Only when Bellamy re-emerged did the fog begin to clear. He spoke carefully but firmly about the shifting winds behind the curtain at MTV. As his fame skyrocketed, some executives, never named but deeply influential, worried he was becoming too powerful, too identifiable, too essential to the brand. At the same time, Hollywood played its own game. Producers and gatekeepers operating quietly in the background steered opportunities toward newer faces and different aesthetics. What the public saw as a sudden disappearance was behind the scenes a slow tightening of doors. It wasn't that Bellamy stopped shining. The rooms he once lit up were simply rearranged without him. And then came the part no one expected, the moment that nearly ended everything. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Bellamy battled a severe case that brought him face to face with mortality. Lying in a hospital bed, struggling for breath, he confronted not just illness, but all the unresolved pain from years of industry politics and personal loss. When he survived, he returned not as the bright-eyed MTV phenom of the 90s, but as a man sharpened by truth. His comeback carried a power no executive could manufacture: honesty, resilience, and the undeniable revelation that his story twists silence, survival, and all was far from over. Newark childhood and brother's tragedy. Long before the bright lights of MTV ever found him, Bill Bellamy was a kid growing up in one of the toughest corners of America. Born on April 7, 1965, he came of age in Newark, New Jersey during a time when the city felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Factories were closing, jobs were disappearing, and entire neighborhoods were left to fend for themselves. His father, William Bellamy Sr., worked grueling warehouse shifts while his mother, Edna Bellamy, juggled multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Their home was filled with love, but surrounded by danger sirens at night, boarded-up windows on nearby blocks, and the unspoken truth every family lived with: staying alive was a daily achievement. For young Bill, walking home from school meant scanning the streets for trouble and hoping the noise around him never turned into something worse. In that harsh environment, Bill found small pockets of joy with his little brother Heavy, a soft-hearted kid who followed him everywhere like a shadow. Heavy was the kind of child who brightened a room without trying, a gentle soul in a city that rarely rewarded gentleness. But Newark could be unforgiving. One summer evening, Heavy stood near a confrontation between rival gangs whose tempers ignited without warning. A single stray bullet cut through the chaos, striking Heavy and ending his life before help could reach him. Bill raced to the scene, but what he found would change him forever, his younger brother lying on the pavement still and silent. That moment carved a permanent scar into Bill's heart. Losing Heavy wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a violent reminder that in his world even innocence wasn't safe. After Heavy's death, Bill felt the world closing in. The streets seemed sharper, colder, angrier. At school, things weren't any easier. He was teased for wearing old clothes, targeted by bullies who sensed weakness, and dismissed by a teacher who once told him he would never amount to anything. Those words stung not because they were true, but because they echoed the hopelessness he saw around him. Too many dreams in Newark ended before they began. Yet somewhere in that pressure, Bill discovered a shield that no gang, no bully, no cruel remark could break his humor. Comedy became more than a coping mechanism. It became Bill's lifeline. When life pressed hardest, he learned he could disarm cruelty with a joke, redirect mockery with a quick punchline, and momentarily lift himself and others above the weight of their surroundings. Each smile he earned was a small victory. Each burst of laughter a reminder that he still had something powerful inside him. Instead of collapsing under grief, Bill quietly turned his pain into determination, the resolve to get out, to rise above, to become someone his brother could be proud of. Newark had taken much from him, but it also forged the resilience that would one day carry him all the way from those dangerous streets to national stardom. The early stand-up hustle. Bill Bellamy's early grind began as a quiet tug-of-war between duty and desire. He enrolled at Rutgers University to make his parents proud and keep a real future on the table, but comedy kept tapping him on the shoulder. By day, he sat in class like everyone else. By night, he was a kid from Newark chasing something bigger than a diploma. When campus settled down and the lights in dorm windows went dark, Bill grabbed his jacket, a notebook of ideas, and rode a late train into New York City. He wasn't traveling for fun, he was traveling for a chance. The city felt loud, dangerous, and alive, and every stop brought him closer to tiny clubs where a career could be born or buried in 5 minutes. Those open mic rooms were brutal in the way only New York can be. The MC would call his name like a challenge, and the crowd, restless, half-drunk, quick to judge, waited to see if he'd sink. Bill got heckled, laughed at for the wrong reasons, and watched plastic cups fly when a joke didn't land. Some nights, he didn't even finish a set before the noise swallowed him. But he kept coming back. Newark had already taught him what fear looked like, so a hostile audience wasn't going to be the thing that stopped him. Every bad night became a lesson how to tighten a punchline, how to pause at the right moment, how to read a room before it turned on you. Then came amateur night at the Apollo Theater, a stage with a reputation like a thundercloud. The Apollo didn't politely not laugh. If you were weak, it booed you off fast sometimes before your first story found a heartbeat. Bill walked on anyway, carrying his family's struggle and the raw ache of losing his brother Heavy. Instead of hiding that pain, he turned it into fuel. He talked about home, about grief, and about the strange way life can hurt you and still demand a smile. The laughs started small, then rolled across the room, and suddenly the same crowd that could destroy a newcomer was lifting him up. In that moment, he wasn't just surviving a set, he was proving he belonged. Somewhere in that audience sat an MTV producer quietly scouting fresh voices. What he saw wasn't only a funny guy. He saw a performer who could command chaos, make strangers feel like friends, and turn tension into a party. Days later, the call came. MTV wanted Bill to audition. For a Rutgers student who'd been fighting for respect in sweaty New York clubs, it felt unreal, like a door appearing where there had only been walls. The grind didn't end that night, but the Apollo cracked the world open and Bill Bellamy stepped through. MTV breakthrough and 90s stardom. When Bill Bellamy stepped into the world of MTV in the early 90s, he didn't just fit in, he lit the place up. MTV was the cultural heartbeat of American youth, and Bill quickly became its most electrifying pulse. On MTV Jams, he brought a charisma that felt effortless, sharp humor, streetwise energy, and the kind of warmth that made every intro feel like he was talking straight to you. Then came MTV Beach House, where his presence turned televised summer parties into national events. He walked through crowds like the sun followed him, and viewers couldn't look away. Ratings climbed. MTV doubled down. Bill wasn't just a host, he was the face millions tuned in to see. In a decade defined by fast-changing tastes, he was the rare constant, the voice you trusted to bring the music, the culture, and the fun right into your living room. Part of what made Bill's run so iconic was his ability to connect with the biggest names in hip-hop and R&B without ever forcing the moment. He sat down with Tupac Shakur, trading jokes and philosophies like two old friends. He interviewed the notorious B.I.G., capturing a warmth from Biggie that few cameras ever caught. With Aaliyah, he created a safe, gentle space where her shy charm blossomed. Snoop Dogg came alive around him, and Diddy, back when he was still Puff Daddy, laughed with him like they were brothers backstage. These weren't stiff, rehearsed TV interviews. Bill made every conversation feel real, relaxed, human. That was his gift. He brought the walls down. And when those walls came down, America got to see its legends as people, not just stars. As Bill's star rose, so did his opportunities. Thanks to MTV's reach, his stand-up shows turned into blockbuster events. He wasn't making the $500 gigs of his early New York days anymore. He was earning thousands a night, sometimes tens of thousands during big weekends and summer specials. The demand never stopped. Comedy clubs packed out. Theaters sold every seat. Bill became one of the rare talents who could dominate TV all week, and then step onto a stage Friday night to the roar of a live audience. The dual success fed into each other. MTV made him a household name, and stand-up reminded people he wasn't just charming, he was legitimately, undeniably funny. But perhaps the most lasting part of Bill Bellamy's MTV era is the path he carved for others. Before him, black VJs were rare on a national mainstream platform. His success kicked that door open wide, making space for future voices like Sway Calloway, Lala Anthony, and Terrence J. He didn't just shine, he illuminated the way. Today, when people look back at 90s MTV, certain moments define the decade, the music, the fashion, the energy. And Bill Bellamy standing at the center of it, laughing, guiding, and bringing a generation together through the screen. Booty call goes cultural. When Bill Bellamy first tossed the phrase booty call into the air on MTV, he had no idea he was about to spark a linguistic wildfire. It was just a playful, off-the-cuff joke, a quick line delivered with that signature Bellamy charm meant to tease the blurred boundaries of late-night romance. But the moment the words left his mouth, something shifted. Viewers laughed, repeated it, shared it, and suddenly the phrase wasn't just a joke on a music show. It was a mirror reflecting the casual, unfiltered honesty of the 90s youth culture. Bill had captured something real, something familiar, and wrapped it in humor. By the time the episode replayed, booty call had already begun its journey into the national vocabulary. Across America, the phrase took on a life of its own. It showed up in college dorms, on street corners, in beauty salons, and in barbershops. The public embraced it instantly, delighted by its boldness and the way it perfectly described a situation everyone understood but rarely labeled out loud. Soon, talk show hosts were sneaking it into monologues. Radio DJs were laughing about it between tracks, and comedians were weaving it into their sets. The way it rolled off the tongue made it irresistible, catchy, mischievous, and unmistakably 90s. It was the kind of phrase that didn't need explanation. People knew exactly what it meant the moment they heard it. And all of it traced back to one unexpected moment on MTV. Then came the ripple effect through the entertainment world. Rappers, R&B singers, and screenwriters began weaving booty call into lyrics, punchlines, and movie scripts. It popped up in songs, blasting from car stereos and sitcoms, drawing huge weekly audiences, and even in film titles, proof that the phrase had leapt from slang to cultural imprint. The media treated it with fascination, analyzing its sudden popularity and debating whether it was harmless fun or a bold sign of changing social norms. Whatever the opinion, one fact stood out. Nobody could deny its impact. A single comedic quip had carved its way firmly into the fabric of American pop culture. And through it all, the person most surprised by this phenomenon was Bill Bellamy himself. He hadn't set out to change the national conversation. He'd simply done what he always did, observed life, found the humor in it, and said it out loud with confidence. But that moment became an enduring part of his legacy, proof of how effortlessly he connected with the public's pulse. Decades later, people still remember him as the man who coined a phrase that defined an era. Booty call wasn't just a joke. It was a cultural timestamp, a reminder of the bold, playful, unfiltered energy of the 90s and a testament to the power of a comedian who understood his audience better than they realized. Hollywood rise and big film roles. When Bill Bellamy's face became familiar in living rooms across America, Hollywood took notice, and not quietly. Studio executives, agents, and producers saw in him something rare, a performer who could charm a crowd, land a joke, and carry a moment all at once. So when the call finally came for a leading role, it felt less like luck and more like destiny. In 1997, Bill stepped into the spotlight as the star of How to Be a Player, a comedy that perfectly matched his smooth energy and razor-sharp wit. Audiences flocked to the film drawn by his charisma, and suddenly the kid who once fought for 5 minutes of stage time in dingy New York clubs was headlining a nationwide box office hit. Hollywood insiders began whispering that he might be the next big crossover star, maybe even the next Chris Tucker, someone who could dominate both comedy and film with effortless magnetism. But it was Bill's next major opportunity that truly changed the trajectory of his career. He landed a role in Any Given Sunday, directed by the legendary Oliver Stone, a man whose films were known to shape cultural conversation. This wasn't just another comedy, it was a gritty, dramatic sports epic, and the cast was a powerhouse. Bill walked onto a set where giants roamed: Al Pacino, a titan of cinema; Jamie Foxx, whose star was rising at full speed; Cameron Diaz, already one of Hollywood's brightest names; and LL Cool J, another artist, successfully straddling the worlds of music and film. To share the screen with talents of that caliber was both a challenge and a validation. Bill proved he could hold his own, delivering performances grounded in authenticity, humor, and surprising depth. Behind the scenes, Hollywood studios started looking at Bill differently. How to Be a Player had shown he could command an audience. Any Given Sunday proved he could stand beside Academy Award winners without losing his shine. Suddenly, his quotes were going up, offers in the high six figures. Conversations about million-dollar roles, meetings where producers spoke openly about building franchises with him. For a brief, thrilling moment, Bill Bellamy was positioned to become one of the next major black leading men in Hollywood. He had the look, the timing, the charm, and most importantly, the momentum. And the industry buzz wasn't exaggeration. It was genuine excitement. Executives loved that he appealed to both mainstream and urban audiences, a crossover appeal that only a handful of stars had mastered. Directors admired his discipline and his willingness to stretch beyond comedy. Co-stars praised his work ethic and his easygoing presence on set. Hollywood doesn't hand out that kind of respect freely. Bill had earned every bit of it. In those years, he stood at the edge of what could have been a towering superstar career, and for anyone watching, it felt like Bill Bellamy was just getting started. MTV politics and blacklist rumors. By the late 90s, Bill Bellamy wasn't just another MTV VJ, he was a ratings engine and a cultural shortcut to cool. If MTV Jams and Beach House felt like the center of youth culture, Bellamy often felt like the guy holding the mic at the center of the room. He had a rare kind of power on television. Artists trusted him, audiences followed him, and the network benefited from the spark he carried into every segment. But inside a media empire, that kind of star power can create anxiety. The more visible and beloved Bill became, the more some high-level figures at MTV reportedly started to look at him as bigger than the role they designed for him, too influential, too independent, too hard to manage the way networks prefer. Then MTV itself began changing shape. In the early 2000s, the channel drifted away from a music-driven identity and leaned hard into reality programming. That pivot wasn't subtle, it was a seismic rewrite of what MTV wanted to be. With that shift, the old lanes for music hosts started disappearing. VJs from the same era felt the squeeze, even the ones who remained on screen. You could see the changing tide in how MTV restructured its on-air faces, rotating different personalities and formats as if trying to reboot the whole brand. In a world where the soundtrack was no longer the main event, a host who lived and breathed the music era suddenly became less central to the new plan. That's where the blacklist rumors began to grow legs. Fans noticed a pattern that felt too sharp to ignore. Bellamy's airtime dried up, his name stopped appearing on major MTV bookings, and nostalgia-driven moments seemed to circle around his era without circling back to him. The transcript paints it as a quiet push to the sidelines. No firing scene, no public announcement, just silence. And to be fair, silence can look like exile when you're watching from the outside. But the most honest framing is this: there's no confirmed public evidence of a formal blacklist. What we can see is a network reshuffling priorities so drastically that the kind of role Bill dominated simply stopped being protected. Meanwhile, the music world carried its own undercurrent. Bellamy's style was polished, friendly, and unmistakably MTV, and that didn't sit perfectly with everyone. The transcript mentions subtle tension with parts of the West Coast rap scene artists who felt he was too clean-cut or too corporate, with rumors involving figures like Ice Cube or LL Cool J. Whether those stories were personal slights or just cultural mismatch, they added another layer to Bill's tightrope walk. He was a bridge between hip-hop authenticity and mainstream television. Bridges take pressure from both sides. In the end, Bill Bellamy's fade from MTV wasn't a single dramatic crash. It was a slow squeeze of politics, shifting taste, and a channel that stopped making space for the very energy he once defined. Industry shift and career decline. When MTV began drifting away from its identity as a music powerhouse, the shift wasn't gentle. It was a tidal wave. Shows like The Real World, Laguna Beach, and The Hills ushered in a new era built on reality TV drama rather than artist interviews or charismatic VJs. For Bill Bellamy, whose presence thrived on live energy music culture and genuine connection, the transformation hit like a rug being pulled out from under his feet. The spotlight he had commanded for years didn't fade because his talent dimmed. It faded because the stage itself was being dismantled. As the network leaned into confessionals, scripted fights, and glossy beach romances, the role of the music host, once the crown jewel of MTV, became almost obsolete. Bill, with his charisma shaped by rhythm and conversation, suddenly found himself standing outside a party he used to headline. At the same time, Hollywood was undergoing its own metamorphosis. The early 2000s brought a noticeable decline in the kind of mid-budget black comedies that had once been Bill's natural lane. The industry began prioritizing new formulas, awkward humor, improv-heavy storytelling, and the rise of creators like Judd Apatow, whose signature style revolved around neurotic, self-conscious characters. That trend left little room for Bill's confident, smooth-talking charm. Roles that once seemed built for him were vanishing, replaced by parts Hollywood casting producers often funneled toward younger, edgier actors. Bill wasn't interested in playing stereotypes, the funny friend, the one-dimensional flirt, or the background comic relief. His refusal to shrink himself into these narrow boxes only deepened the gap between what he offered and what Hollywood at that moment was willing to buy. Meanwhile, a new generation exploded onto the comedy scene, fueled by tools Bill never had access to: Kevin Hart, Cat Williams, Mike Epps and Cedric the Entertainer were harnessing the internet-building followings through viral clips, YouTube specials, and early social media momentum. They tapped into an audience that craved immediacy and digital connection, an advantage Bill didn't have when he was coming up. The rise of streaming platforms like Netflix made it even easier for these new stars to dominate. Suddenly, comedy was being discovered in living rooms at midnight, not in clubs or cable shows. The spotlight, once a limited resource, had multiplied, but so had the competition. And for Bill, whose fame grew in a very different era, the digital shift felt like trying to sprint on a moving walkway going the opposite direction. All these forces created a perfect storm, pushing Bill further from the center of the entertainment world. It wasn't that he lost his talent or his hunger, it was that the industry around him changed faster than anyone could adapt. MTV no longer showcased the world where he shined. Hollywood's taste veered toward new voices and new aesthetics. And comedy's freshest stars were rising on platforms that didn't exist when Bill built his name. His career didn't fall because he stopped being good. It faltered because the world he mastered reinvented itself overnight, leaving even its brightest icons scrambling to find where they now belonged. Marriage strain and affair talk. When Bill Bellamy's career momentum began slipping away from the bright center of MTV and Hollywood, the impact didn't stop at his resume, it seeped straight into his home. He had married Kristen Baker, later known as Kristen Bellamy, a woman whose strength and grace had long been the quiet foundation of his life. In the early years, their partnership felt unshakable, glamorous premieres, laughter behind the scenes, and a shared belief that Bill's trajectory would keep rising. But when the spotlight dimmed and the industry doors quietly shifted, the pressure behind closed doors began to build. Financial uncertainty so different from the steady stream of income in the 90s created tension that no couple, no matter how loving, is fully prepared for. Bill was trying to rediscover himself while Kristen was trying to keep the family anchored, and those two battles didn't always move in the same direction. The stress seeped into everyday moments. Conversations turned into silences. Silences turned into stretches of distance. To the outside world, they still appeared picture perfect, smiling on red carpets, posting family photos, but inside their home, it sometimes felt like they were living parallel lives. Their two children, who had grown up watching their father on television and stages, now saw him wrestling with uncertainty. And Kristen, who had married a man bathed in momentum, suddenly had to navigate the storm with him, even when both were exhausted. Marriage in Hollywood is rarely simple, but marriage during a personal and professional crisis is a different level of challenge. Then came the rumors, those unavoidable swirling shadows that follow anyone who has ever been famous. Between 2010 and 2015, online commenters and gossip sites began whispering about a supposed affair involving Bill and a younger female colleague. There were no photos, no recordings, no statements, no sources, just speculation that multiplied through the echo chamber of the internet. The rumor mill, hungry for scandal, didn't need proof to keep the story alive. For Kristen, the accusations were painful not because she doubted her husband, but because the noise surrounding their marriage became impossible to ignore. For Bill, the only option was silence. He chose not to fuel the fire, not to defend every whisper, believing that the less he said, the faster the storm would pass. But even baseless rumors leave a residue. Combined with career uncertainty and financial strain, that period marked one of the darkest emotional chapters of Bill's life. He was still performing, still appearing on stage, still smiling when cameras turned on. But offstage, he was unraveling. Depression crept into the corners of his days, fed by exhaustion and the pressure of protecting his family while quietly fighting his own doubts. Yet through it all, Bill and Kristen held on, not perfectly, not romantically, but realistically, with grit instead of glamour. Their marriage endured the whispers, the distance, the internal storms, proving that sometimes survival, not perfection, is its own kind of love story. COVID, near-death, and deep loss. When COVID-19 swept across the world in 2020, it didn't spare celebrities, legends, or anyone who once seemed larger than life. and Bill Bellamy learned that truth in the most terrifying way. What began as exhaustion and shortness of breath quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. He was rushed to the hospital, hooked to machines, surrounded by masked doctors and nurses fighting to stabilize his oxygen levels. For a man who had spent decades commanding stages and screens with unstoppable energy, suddenly being unable to breathe on his own felt unreal, almost cruel. In those long, uncertain hours, Bill lay in a cold hospital room, wondering if he had already taken his last bow. The noise of the world faded, replaced by the haunting thought that he might never walk back out to see his family again. Outside the hospital glass, Kristen Bellamy stood with the heaviness of someone bracing for the unthinkable. She couldn't hold her husband's hand, couldn't sit beside him, couldn't whisper the reassurance he so desperately needed. Instead, she watched monitors, prayed through tears, and tried to stay strong for their 2 children who were terrified but trying not to show it. Every phone call from the hospital became a moment of suspended breath. Was he improving or slipping further away? Kristen later shared that the hardest part wasn't fear itself, but the silence, the helplessness of knowing that the man she loved was fighting for his life, just steps away, unreachable behind quarantine walls. For Bill, the battle with COVID didn't happen in a vacuum. As he drifted in and out of exhaustion, memories resurfaced, painful, unresolved, and sharp as broken glass. He thought of Heavy, his younger brother, whose death had carved a permanent hollow in his heart decades earlier. He remembered the funerals of an uncle, a cousin, a childhood friend, loved ones he'd lost over the years, each loss layering on top of the last. In the quiet terror of that hospital bed, those faces returned with striking clarity. It was as if the universe was asking him, "Are you ready to join them? Are you done fighting?" And for the first time in his life, the man built from humor, hustle, and raw resilience felt genuinely close to giving up. When Bill finally recovered enough to return home, he wasn't the same man who had walked into the hospital. Surviving a near-death experience does something to the soul. It rearranges priorities, reshapes fears, and forces a person to confront truths they've tried to outrun. Bill came back quieter, more private, protective of his emotional space. He withdrew from the spotlight not out of defeat, but out of necessity. COVID had shaken something loose inside him, reopening old wounds while highlighting how fragile everything is: career, fame, even breath itself. In that quiet retreat, Bill wasn't disappearing. He was healing slowly, stitching himself back together after nearly losing the fight of his life. Quiet years, smart money moves. When the spotlight dimmed and MTV no longer echoed his name the way it once had, many assumed Bill Bellamy's fortune would fade along with the fame. But Bill had built something far sturdier than a flashy celebrity lifestyle. He had built a career foundation grounded in hustle, smart decisions, and long-term thinking. While he wasn't plastered across magazine covers or starring in blockbuster films, he was quietly doing something far more sustainable, staying on the road. His stand-up tours remained steady year after year. Comedy clubs, mid-sized theaters, and weekend residencies across the country continued welcoming him, not because he was a relic of the 90s, but because he still delivered sharp timing, rich storytelling, and a presence that reminded audiences why they had loved him to begin with. Bill knew that as long as he could walk onto a stage and make people laugh, he'd never be broke. One veteran comic, a longtime colleague, once said admiringly, "Bill will always land on his feet." The man was built for the long run. Outside the clubs and theaters, Bill made another smart move, one that many entertainers overlook until it's too late. He invested in real estate in California, not in ostentatious mansions or short-lived splurges, but in practical, stable properties. Homes in neighborhoods like Sherman Oaks, Encino, and parts of Orange County became his quiet financial anchors. Real estate didn't require fame ratings or a hot streak. It grew on its own, accumulating value year after year, while Bill focused on his craft. Even when his presence in Hollywood slowed, those investments kept him rooted and secure. This wasn't the financial profile of a fallen star. It was the portfolio of a man who understood longevity better than hype. Meanwhile, personal finance analysts, the same ones who track celebrity earnings and net worth, began publishing estimates of Bill's financial standing. Their numbers consistently placed him in the $8 to $10 million range. While these figures aren't official, they paint a clear picture of someone who managed his money far more carefully than many of his peers. Bill never overspent on the extravagances that swallowed other entertainers whole. He didn't chase status symbols or try to maintain illusions of peak-era fame. Instead, he kept things steady. Controlled pace, controlled spending, controlled lifestyle. More importantly, Bill's financial resilience revealed something deeper about him. He didn't depend on the entertainment industry to validate his worth. When Hollywood slowed down, he didn't crumble, he adapted. He tightened his circle, invested wisely, and turned back to the art form that had saved him once before. Stand-up comedy became more than income. It became a lifeline, a way to stay connected, relevant, and creatively alive. Bill Bellamy may have stepped away from the mainstream spotlight, but he never stepped away from building a life with stability and intention. And in the end, that quiet, steady climb proved just as impressive as any peak he reached in the 90s. Podcast-driven comeback and viral fame. When Bill Bellamy finally stepped back into the public eye, he didn't do it the way most former TV icons attempt a comeback. He didn't chase a network revival or a nostalgia reboot. He built something entirely his own. His podcast, Top Billin' with Bill Bellamy, began quietly, almost like a private conversation with old friends. But the moment he started sharing behind-the-scenes stories about the artists who shaped a generation, Tupac, Biggie, Aaliyah, Ice Cube, Snoop Diddy, and more, the internet lit up. His voice carried memories viewers had never heard before. Tupac cracking jokes backstage, Biggie showing flashes of vulnerability, Aaliyah's gentle confidence, the raw humor that never made it to MTV screens. These weren't typical interviews. They were living snapshots from a man who had actually been there. And the world, especially a new, hungry audience, leaned in. Clips from the podcast began flooding TikTok and YouTube platforms ruled by Gen Z and millennials, many of whom hadn't even been born during Bill's MTV peak. Yet they were captivated. His storytelling had rhythm, patience, and warmth qualities rare in today's fast-cut, attention-starved content landscape. Younger viewers started asking, "Who is this guy?" while older fans smiled, replying, "He's the reason MTV was cool." The beauty of Bill's resurgence lay in contrast. While the digital age thrives on speed, his stories moved like jazz, smooth, steady, and deeply human. Viral comment sections became mini archives of shared memory with younger fans, discovering the legends of hip-hop through Bellamy's eyes. As his online presence exploded, something remarkable happened. Bill didn't just reclaim the audience he once had, he built a brand new one. That renewed attention pulled him back onto the stand-up stage, where he performed with a sharper edge and a more seasoned soul. Years of struggle and survival had refined him. Now his comedy blended nostalgia, truth, and wisdom in a way that packed theaters. Old fans showed up to relive the energy. New fans showed up out of curiosity. Everyone left feeling like they'd experienced something authentic. Talk shows and radio hosts noticed the momentum and began inviting him back, and each appearance carried the confidence of a man who had lived through the industry's storms and learned how to navigate on his own terms. Perhaps the most surprising ripple came from Hollywood itself. A younger generation of filmmakers raised on the era Bill helped shape reached out with fresh enthusiasm. They didn't see him as a relic. They saw him as an original voice, a cultural bridge who brought authenticity no script could imitate. Offers for cameos, supporting roles, and mentor-type characters started rolling in. Bill Bellamy's comeback wasn't a return to the past. It was a rebirth built on truth, memory, and undeniable storytelling. In an era obsessed with reinvention, he found the perfect formula. He simply told the stories only he could tell, and the world came back to listen. As we trace Bill Bellamy's rise, fall, and remarkable rebirth, one question lingers: was his disappearance the result of shifting eras, industry politics, or something deeper about how black talent is valued and forgotten in American entertainment? His story forces us to look beyond nostalgia and confront the uncomfortable truth that even icons can be pushed aside before their time. But Bellamy's resilience rewrites the narrative, proving legacy isn't defined by a network or a trend. So what do you think really happened, and what does his comeback say about the culture today? Let's talk about it here on Legends of Black Excellence.